Cenk, you and I were talking when I came out to LA, the story, I wonder if this is the time to talk about, the National Association of Broadcasters. I mean, CNN has made a fortune, not just from cable subscription, but from how they take the sort of the local cable advertisements. The local cable providers get to run political ads on CNN during election seasons, and some of that money goes to the local cable provider. A lot of that money goes back to CNN. It's the same thing with local television stations. They make a fortune with their political ads. And so the biggest advocate, the biggest lobbyist, the most powerful lobbyist against campaign finance reform are the people who own the National Association of Broadcasters, the broadcasters themselves. There are organizations that will not let their reporters do stories about campaign finance reform because their news director or general manager will say, you see all those people in the newsroom? They have jobs because we had a competitive election, last year and we made all this money. So don't be telling me about campaign finance reform, publicly funded elections having limitations. The broadcasters don't want any limitations on money. They make too much.
Yeah, in the last election cycle, there was about $6.6 billion spent at the presidential level. But overall, there was about $14 billion spent in all of those elections. And the great lion's share of that went to television ads. So if you're wondering why television never talks about corruption, it's because they are the #1 benefactor of that corruption. In fact, David, you said you didn't mind telling that story on air. Can you share with us your experience in local news?
Yeah, well, at a time when I was, having a conversation with an NBC general manager of a local station, and I was telling him about, the lobbying from the National Association of Broadcasters and how I wanted, was trying to do some sort of story about the influence and how, people think, oh, the media is a fair arbiter, but that the media has a vested interest in allowing as much money to slosh through politics as possible because of the television ads. And he said to me, he says, well, good luck with that. He said, you're welcome to, I suppose, you're at MSNBC. If you want to do that story, that's fine. But I can tell you that at my O&O and at a lot of the owned and operated NBC stations, that story is never going to see the light of air. And that's because we have so many people who are employed because of political ads. And so sure, you want to do something about the corrupting influence of money in politics, have at it, but you're not going to be talking about the broadcaster's angle, and your story that you put together for MSNBC is not going to run on the local stations because there are a lot of people at these local stations who are employed because of the money that we make every other year from campaign advertising. And I went back and said, okay, well, that's fine to point out that people have jobs because of the money that television stations make, but why can't we at least even do a story about how the broadcasters, the network-owned stations and cable have a vested interest in making sure there is no campaign finance reform, have a vested interest in seeing the money get larger and have more money slosh through the system. And he says, well, that's up to you, but it's not something that I would encourage in my newsroom or in my station. And in fact, I heard from colleagues who would occasionally bring stuff up about the amount of money that was being spent in a particular race who were told, nah, that's not really something that we cover.
Yeah, well, that last part is definitely true. It's not something that they cover, and you telling us why they don't cover it with an actual personal experience is an excellent example of that. And what was that person's position again? Their role?
He was the general manager of an NBC station.
Is that like an intern?
And I don't want to, I don't want to say the city. I don't want to because it was a conversation obviously just between the two of us. But this. To me, I mean, he was very open. He was very open and pointed out, he said, that's fine that you're doing this, want to do this great journalism, but you tell all these people out here in the newsroom that they shouldn't have jobs, because that's what happens if we suddenly have to turn off the spigot of the money that's coming through that we make every from campaign ads. And where does it end? Should we turn off, other ads as well? And so we were just at cross purposes. He runs a business. Television is a business. The broadcast stations are a business. And within that business, there may be some journalists who actually care about things like campaign finance reform, but you're at loggerheads.
Right, and all those people do have jobs. They just don't have jobs in news because they've all signed up to do a job where not only do you not tell people what the actual news is, which is that money controls politics. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the show, just about a decade ago, 97% of the time, the candidate with more money won the elections. It is the #1 factor by an order of magnitude. But that 97% number didn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. liberal, conservative, nothing mattered. The only thing that mattered was who had more money. But yet, in the news business on television, they never report the overwhelming #1 factor. Even today, in the last election cycle, 87% of the candidates that had more money won. Yes, because of progressives and just Democrats, we've lowered that number, but it's still a giant number. And if you're covering that up actively, you're not just, oh, I didn't cover that beat, I missed a story. No, you're part of the cover up for the corruption. You're doing the exact opposite of the news.
Yeah.
All right, John.
No results. But yeah, and I'm sure that there's some people, working in those offices that are appalled at America's steady approach towards authoritarianism and everything. Well, look, you're a part of it. Like honestly, you might not want to be, and it may be a necessary evil for your own career or whatever, but that is the effect that it has.
Well, some of those people, John, in their own newsrooms will freely acknowledge, oh yeah, it's an election year. That's why we're going from 6 hours of news coverage on this particular station to 8 hours, because we have so much money, so many ads we want, and generally, political ads do better and are more effective in newscasts than say in entertainment programming, and that's why you will see stations and their employees acknowledge, oh yeah, we're adding hours this year, we're adding the number of newscasts at our local station because it's an election year. We're going to have more advertising inventory, and we want to be able to run it across more programs and make more money.
Yeah. And one last part of it, that is, I know because of my involvement in politics and having seen some internal polling, that local news is still the #1 place that people get their news about politics.
Yes.
Now that is a disaster because of the phenomenon we just talked about, but it's true. And so you should know that, and that is why they pour all that corrupt money into local news, and that's why local news never talks about the corruption.